On a spring morning in the year 1787, on the sandy, worthless plots of the Sablons just outside Paris, a strange piece of theater begins. A pharmacist named Antoine-Augustin Parmentier has posted a detachment of armed royal soldiers around a field. They stand at attention, muskets ready, guarding the crop as if it were the king's own gold. Word spreads through the surrounding villages. Whatever is growing behind those guards must be extraordinarily valuable. Why else would the crown pay soldiers to protect it? And then, at sunset, Parmentier does the strangest thing of all. He sends the guards home. Every night, the field is left completely undefended. And every night, exactly as he planned, the local peasants creep in under the cover of darkness and steal the mysterious, precious plants, digging them up, carrying them off, and planting them in their own gardens, convinced they are getting away with something forbidden. They were stealing potatoes. The same potatoes that, just a few years earlier, the French Parliament had effectively banned. The same lumpy brown tubers that Europeans had spent 2 centuries insisting were poisonous, unnatural, disgusting, and possibly the food of the devil himself. So think about that for a second. A man had to trick an entire population into stealing a vegetable by pretending it was so valuable it needed an armed guard. Today, that same vegetable is the single cheapest thing on the fast food menu. You get a mountain of it, deep fried, for pocket change. You leave half of it uneaten in a paper bag. Humanity now grows something like 375 million tons of it every single year. 250 years ago, people believed it caused leprosy. How did that happen? How did a knobbly, dirt-covered root from a freezing mountain range in South America, a plant Europeans genuinely thought was cursed, go on to feed empires, win wars, trigger the deadliest famine in modern European history, and quietly power the population explosion that built the industrial world? Because here's the thing about the potato. Almost no other single food has killed and saved so many people. Kings staked their thrones on it. One nation's entire population collapsed because of it. Some historians will tell you, with a straight face, that the potato is one of the reasons the modern world exists at all. And the whole story turns on one brutal, beautiful fact. The potato is the most efficient calorie machine humanity has ever found in the ground. Follow that fact, and you get everything else. The theater with the guards, the famine ships, the frozen empires of the Andes. The reason a Prussian king is buried with potatoes on his grave to this day. So, let's follow it. From a lake at the top of the world, through the fear and the fraud, into the wars and the hunger, and finally, to the paper bag of fries cooling on your table right now. Let's go back to the beginning. The real beginning. And it starts higher up than almost any other food on Earth. The potato was born in the Andes, in the brutal, thin-aired highlands around Lake Titicaca, on the border of modern Peru and Bolivia, nearly 4,000 meters above sea level. This is a place where the sun scorches by day and the temperature plunges below freezing at night. Most crops simply cannot survive there. The potato could. Somewhere around 8,000 years ago, the people of the Andes did something extraordinary. They took a small, bitter, mildly toxic wild tuber and, over thousands of years, domesticated it, not into one crop, but into thousands. To this day, the Andes hold something like 4,000 native varieties of potato. Purple ones, red ones, twisted ones the size of a marble, ones adapted to specific altitudes and specific slopes of specific mountains. This is one of the greatest feats of agricultural engineering in human history, and it happened without writing, without the wheel, without a word of it recorded in any book. And then they solved the problem that would define this entire story. Storage. A fresh potato rots. But the Andean peoples invented a technology so clever it still stuns food scientists. They would leave potatoes out overnight to freeze, then trample them underfoot in the morning sun to squeeze out the water, and repeat this for days until they had a light, rock-hard, freeze-dried product called chuño. Chuño doesn't rot. Chuño can last for 10 years or more. Think about what that means. In a world before refrigeration, before canning, these mountain people had created a portable, near-indestructible reserve of pure calories, and that reserve became the fuel of an empire. Because when the Inca rose to power, building a state that stretched over 4,000 kilometers down the spine of South America, ruling perhaps 10 million people, they ran that empire on the potato. Vast state warehouses stored chuño to feed armies on the march and to survive famine years. Historians have argued, quite seriously, that you cannot build the Inca Empire without the potato. The armies that conquered the Andes marched on freeze-dried potato. This was the potato at the height of its first life. Sacred, central, the literal foundation of a civilization. And then, in 1532, that civilization met a few hundred Spaniards with steel and smallpox, and everything changed. When the conquistadors under Francisco Pizarro tore the Inca Empire apart, they were hunting for gold and silver. They found the richest silver mine in the world at Potosi, and to feed the enslaved workers dying in those mines, they fed them the local staple, chuño. The Spanish barely noticed the potato itself. It was food for the conquered, food for the poor, an afterthought. But somewhere in the 1570s, on a ship crossing the Atlantic, a few of these strange tubers made the journey to Spain. And here, the story takes its most bizarre turn, because Europe took one look at the potato and recoiled in horror. You have to understand how alien this thing was. Europeans had never seen a plant like it. It grew underground, in the dark, in the dirt, which, to a deeply religious and superstitious society, felt sinister. It didn't appear anywhere in the Bible, which for many was proof enough that God never intended humans to eat it. Worse, botanists quickly realized the potato belonged to the nightshade family, the same family as deadly poisonous plants Europeans genuinely feared. So the rumors began, and they were vicious. The potato caused leprosy. It caused fevers. It caused, some whispered, excessive lust. It was the devil's plant. In parts of France, the fear got so bad that in 1748, the French Parliament formally forbade its cultivation, on the belief that it spread disease. A food that had sustained an entire empire for thousands of years, banned by law, because it looked ugly and grew in the dark. For roughly 2 centuries, this was the potato's fate in Europe. Grown grudgingly as pig feed, eaten only by the truly desperate, treated as something between a curiosity and a curse. So how do you break a superstition that strong? How do you convince millions of terrified, stubborn people to eat the very thing they believe will rot their flesh? You need a war, and you need a few obsessive, slightly manipulative men willing to trick an entire continent for its own good. Which brings us to the empires, and the strange campaign to force-feed Europe the potato. Our first protagonist is Prussia, and its ruthlessly practical king, Frederick the Great. Frederick understood something his subjects didn't. Grain harvests failed constantly, and when they failed, people starved and armies collapsed. The potato, hidden safely underground, survived droughts and even survived armies marching across a field, because the crop was beneath the soil where soldiers couldn't easily burn or trample it. To Frederick, this wasn't a curse. It was a strategic weapon. So, in 1756, he issued what became known as the Kartoffelbefehl, the potato order, commanding his peasants to grow and eat potatoes. And when they resisted, when they grumbled that even dogs wouldn't touch the things, legend says Frederick used the exact same trick Parmentier would later use in France. He posted soldiers to guard his royal potato fields, making the crop look precious and desirable, while quietly instructing the guards to look the other way, so curious peasants would steal the plants and grow their own. Whether every detail of that story is true or embellished over time, the outcome is not in doubt. Prussia became a potato nation. And to this day, visitors to Frederick the Great's grave in Potsdam leave potatoes on the stone. Not flowers. Potatoes. For the king who forced them to eat. Now, quick pause. Because if you're finding this genuinely fascinating, if you like the idea that the food which built the modern world was once banned as a tool of the devil, that's the whole reason this channel exists. A quick subscribe tells the algorithm to push more of these unlikely histories to people like you, and it costs you absolutely nothing. Alright, back to France, and the prisoner of war who fell in love with a potato. Our second act belongs to that pharmacist from the opening, Antoine-Augustin Parmentier, and his conversion is the best part. During the 7 Years' War, Parmentier was captured by the Prussians and thrown into a prison, where he was fed almost nothing but potatoes. His captors expected the diet to sicken or kill him. Instead, he thrived. Parmentier walked out of that prison a fanatic. He had discovered, firsthand, that everything France believed about the potato was a lie. And he spent the rest of his life on an almost theatrical campaign to prove it. The guarded fields at Sablons were just one stunt. He also threw lavish dinners where every single dish was made from potatoes, inviting famous guests like Benjamin Franklin. He presented bouquets of purple potato flowers to King Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, and the Queen, delighted, wore the blossoms in her hair, while the king pinned one to his coat. Suddenly, the potato wasn't peasant filth. It was royal fashion. The propaganda worked. By the time the French Revolution and its famines hit in the 1790s, the potato had gone from banned to essential. The gardens of the Tuileries Palace itself were dug up and planted with potatoes. And here is the number that ties this whole era together. The reason kings and pharmacists fought so hard. An acre of potatoes could produce 2 to 4 times more calories than an acre of wheat, and it did it faster. 2 to 4 times. On the same land. Think about that for a second. In a world where the difference between 2 harvests and 1 was the difference between a full belly and a mass grave. The potato didn't just add food, it multiplied it. And that multiplication reshaped Europe more profoundly than any king. This is the third act, and it's the biggest of all. As the potato spread across northern Europe in the 1700s and 1800s, the population exploded. It's not a coincidence. One landmark economic study estimated that the arrival of the potato may account for roughly a quarter of the growth in Old World population and urbanization between 1700 and 1900. A quarter from one crop. More food meant more surviving children, meant more workers, meant more people crowding into the growing cities. The potato quietly fed the labor force of the Industrial Revolution. The factory towns of Britain, the growing armies of Europe, the sheer human mass that powered the modern age, a huge share of them were fed on the cheap, dependable, calorie-dense potato. Adam Smith himself praised it, marveling that it could feed so many people on so little land. The potato had gone from the devil's root to the invisible engine of Western civilization. But there was a fatal flaw hidden inside this miracle, and it was about to kill 1 million people. Here is the trap. Remember those 4,000 varieties in the Andes? That astonishing diversity was a defense. If one variety failed, the others survived. But Europe didn't import 4,000 varieties. It imported a tiny handful, and in one country, it came to depend almost entirely on one single type. That country was Ireland. By the 1840s, Ireland's poor, millions of them, had become almost totally dependent on the potato, and mostly on one prolific variety called the lumper. It was a monoculture on a national scale. An adult laborer might eat 5 kilograms of potatoes a day and almost nothing else. The potato was so productive that it allowed Ireland's population to swell to around 8.5 million people, most of them surviving on tiny plots of this single crop. They had built their entire existence on one plant, and in 1845, that plant met its predator. A water mold called Phytophthora infestans, potato blight, arrived in Ireland, likely carried on ships. In a monoculture with no genetic diversity to resist it, it spread like fire. Fields that were green and healthy in the morning turned into black, stinking rot within days. The food supply of a nation dissolved into slime in the ground. What followed was the Great Famine, one of the deadliest catastrophes of the 19th century. Between 1845 and 1852, roughly 1 million people died of starvation and disease. Another 1 to 2 million fled the country, packing onto crowded, dangerous ships bound for America, Britain, and beyond. Ireland lost somewhere between 1/5 and 1/4 of its entire population in a handful of years. And the country's population didn't just dip, it collapsed and kept falling for decades afterward. Ireland's population today is still smaller than it was before the famine struck. Almost no nation on earth can say that. The potato had built Ireland's population, and the potato, or rather, the reckless dependence on a single strain of it, destroyed it. That is the terrible lesson buried in this story. The same efficiency that made the potato a miracle made the failure catastrophic. When you build everything on one plant, you are one disease away from the abyss. So, what broke the spell? What ended the potato's reign of life and death and turned it into the humble, harmless thing on your plate? Ironically, it was abundance and science. In the aftermath of the blight, agriculturalists scrambled to breed new resistant varieties and to reintroduce genetic diversity. Farmers learned, at horrifying cost, never to bet a nation on a single crop again. And as global trade, refrigeration, railways, and industrial farming spread across the 20th century, the potato became something it had never been in its violent history. Ordinary, safe, everywhere. The crop that had once been guarded by soldiers, that had toppled a nation, became so cheap and so reliable that it disappeared into the background of the modern diet. When something is available everywhere, all the time, for almost nothing, it stops being precious. It stops being feared. It stops being anything at all except lunch. The scarcity that gave the potato its terrifying power was gone. But the fingerprints are everywhere. Once you know where to look, you cannot stop seeing them. Look at America. Those famine ships carried an estimated 1 to 2 million Irish emigrants across the Atlantic, and they and their descendants reshaped the United States, its cities, its politics, its culture. Tens of millions of Americans today trace their ancestry to that exodus. A significant piece of modern America exists because a mold killed a plant in Ireland. The potato wrote itself into the bloodline of a superpower. Look at the world map of food. The potato is now the 4th largest food crop on the planet, after wheat, rice, and maize. It is grown in more than 100 countries. China, not Ireland, not Peru, is now the world's single largest producer. A crop from a lake in Bolivia is now a staple in the fields of Asia. Look at your language and your table. The French fry, the crisp, the mashed potato, the vodka distilled from potatoes, the entire fast food empire built on golden deep-fried sticks. One company alone, McDonald's, buys such a colossal quantity of potatoes that it helped standardize how the crop is grown across whole regions. The Idaho potato became an American icon. The word and the thing are stitched into daily life so tightly that we've forgotten there was ever anything strange about it. And look at the deepest legacy of all, the one the Andean farmers understood 8,000 years ago and Ireland forgot. Diversity is survival. The Great Famine became the founding trauma of modern thinking about food security, about seed banks, about why we now carefully preserve thousands of crop varieties in vaults around the world. High in the Andes, there is an institution today whose entire mission is to protect the potato's genetic diversity, those thousands of native types, as insurance for all of humanity. We are still, right now, guarding the potato. Just like Parmentier's soldiers, only this time, the threat is real. So let's go back to where we started, to a field outside Paris in 1787, and a clever man posting guards around a crop, betting that if he made a humble tuber look precious enough, people would risk everything to steal it. He was right. But he was also, without knowing it, telling the truth. The potato was precious, more precious than gold, more precious than the silver of Potosi, because you cannot eat silver, and empires do not march on gold. They march on calories, and no plant on earth delivered calories like this one. Now look down at your plate, at the fries going cold in the paper bag, at the sack of potatoes in your cupboard that cost less than a cup of coffee, that you'll leave to sprout in the corner and half forget. There it is, the devil's root, the engine of the Industrial Revolution, the killer of 1,000,000 Irish and the maker of modern America. Grown 8,000 years ago by people building an empire on a frozen mountain, feared as a curse for 2 centuries, guarded by soldiers, mourned in graveyards, carried across an ocean in the holds of famine ships, and sold to you now for the price of nothing at all. And you will eat it without a single thought. That is the real story of the potato. Not that it was ever cursed, and not that it was ever magic. The story is that humanity found the most powerful food it had ever known, and then did what humanity always does with power. We feared it, we banned it, we fought over it, we tricked each other into taking it. We built whole nations on it, and then we grew so dependent, so careless, so certain of the abundance, that we forgot how easily it could all rot in the ground. The most dangerous thing in the world is not the treasure everyone is fighting over. It's the miracle everyone has stopped noticing. And there's a sack of it in your kitchen right now.